make sure that we have time to address questions, but we'll do that via the text box. And that way, everybody has the answer and can, it actually is also included in the recording and the download of this webinar so that people can access it after the fact. So we'll get started for our August 2015 Club Excellence Workshop. In August, we focus on PR marketing and communications. And I took a little different tact here with this topic this summer, as I've been fielding quite a bit of troubleshooting ultimately, and different strategies that clubs and resorts are using. And this is the time of year that tends to heat up as you approach your meetings. Maybe you've had them recently, or maybe you're just scheduling those meetings to kind of review your annual plan, operating agreements, schedules with the resort. And I wanted to take that opportunity to put this in the context of this month's subject, which is PR and marketing and communications. And I think that what the premise of this presentation, and with it covering that topic for this month, is that these relations with the resorts often start and end with very operational agreements, and lots of nuts and bolts and hill space and schedules. And today's presentation, we're going to talk about taking a bit of a step back from that and making sure that your relationship with the resort that you are operating at is as strategic as possible, and is really looking at sort of a long-term strategic plan, if you will, or strategic partnership between the mountain or the resort or your host venue and your club. And so that's what we're going to tweak the subject to the specifics of that relationship. I want to remind you all that these workshops, which operate on that annual curriculum that we're just looking at, are all posted at the link here, so that might be something to grab while we're here. And there is over a year's worth of these webinars in there on various subjects, and you can go download them, view them. Some of them are not the actual webinar. They may only be the presentation or the PowerPoint in a few cases, but that log is a pretty healthy dose of club development resources for you, your board, leadership, and parents. So, club resort relations. This is an area that the second this gets mentioned, or we bring this topic up, really any club and every club has both horror stories, if you will, represented by the lady there on the left, and in some cases we have wonderful relations and sort of fairies and unicorns and mutual developments and strategic plans and examples of resort club relations that are just exceptional. And so we know in the industry, and we know even at any given club, this story maybe goes back and forth, maybe it changes, maybe it's a horror story in some areas, maybe it's fairies and unicorns in others. But the idea with this presentation today and the discussion is to identify some strategies that we have further uncovered, looked at, negotiated, and been involved with through club development, so that we can make sure as much of it is moving in the direction of a strong strategic partnership, and that becomes the story at more and more clubs around the country, and that we get away from these kind of horror stories of divergent priorities not working well together, and just the many different horror stories we might have out there. So that's the idea with today. The first step, and I tend to always start here because it really is not just to be trite and sort of overly simplify it, but this is another area where mission and vision, and really understanding mission and vision and various missions and visions is really the key first step. I would say that without fail, when I'm working with a club that is really struggling in this relationship with their host resort, it is I can almost always boil it down to the fact that either A, the club doesn't have a unified mission and vision of their own. They don't understand or don't accept the mission and vision of the resort, and or they have not worked to sort of look at these three missions with the community kind of being a third entity, and really looked at it as this sort of Venn diagram where, boy, those three entities are really doing dramatically different things, have dramatically different missions in some ways and visions, but what's that magic piece to the puzzle in the middle there, where really all three are together and focusing on those. And in order to focus on that, there needs to be a really open book, blank slate understanding of these three missions, and it needs to be articulated, communicated, and strategized amongst the different parties. And so a lot of it is just that, is again, a lot of times with these three different visions, everybody dives in on the logistics, everybody dives in on the operations without maybe taking a step back and really saying, hey, our mission and vision is this. We understand yours is this. Is that accurate? Where are the areas that we can have a common mission and vision? And those are the areas that we're going to focus on and support one another. So it really is important to take that step back, especially in this arena. Some of the biggest mistakes that we have identified with that relationship around the country with our ski clubs, and this would hold true with many nonprofit and or educational or community organizations that have a relationship with a local business or with the local community. These are some of the big pitfalls that we get into as ski clubs, nonprofits, educational programs. We use the language "you should." Oftentimes, a board of a club, the parents of a club, the community that a club represents, really kind of gets in this rut where they use language like the mountain should do this, or the corporation should do that, or they should give us all these free passes, they should groom for us, they should open more terrain for us. And that's not to say that that's not wrong and that we don't need all those things, but when it's approached in that language, that you should language, there's no place for that in the ultimately, oftentimes there's no place for that in the resort mission and vision itself. And it immediately indicates that the club, to that second bullet, is sort of expecting the resort to understand its mission without really coming to the table and understanding theirs. And so the second that you should language is being used, down to the third bullet here, right away, the language is placing a value judgment on the various missions and visions. And it can be overt with some of the language that clubs may use and may feel, and oftentimes rightly so, but we have to really kind of check ourselves here and look at the big picture relationship. But oftentimes the rhetoric in a club can not only be, you should, but they don't understand us, and all they're trying to do is make money and charge fees for everything. And really, so it's lots of judgment, lots of you, them, lots of you shoulds before there's been an attempt to build those bridges. And so that's frankly, whether we like it or not as ski clubs, that is a really big pitfall, and oftentimes uh, that environment exists for 10, 20, 30 years, and it just doesn't move, and it ultimately doesn't serve the needs of the clubs and our athletes and the parents. So somehow we have to break that cycle of using "you should," expecting them to understand us where we haven't come to the table and said we really understand their goals, placing values on that, and then um, not being an ambassador or an advocate for the resort. And I've talked to many club communities about this, and it's one of those things where, kind of like being on a board, you can have your personal opinions about any number of strategies or community initiatives or what the resort is doing or not doing, but kind of as a board member or even as a member of the club, that in your rhetoric and in your communications, marketing, and public relations world, there's that all has to be kind of tabled, and the mountain has to be advocated for, and the club and its membership has to be the best ambassadors for the resort. Um, with that said, the club brings great value to the resort by being one of the primary liaisons to the entire community. And we'll get into a little bit more of how to exercise that, but the club has many more tools at its disposal than a resort that does have a very particular mission, which is to be a profitable business. The club can be a primary partner in kind of helping get their message across to the community, being their best fan. And again, kind of whether you agree with everything they're doing or not, this is a way to advance the relationship. And then another big one is just the big mistake is sort of going to the table with the resort and always asking without immediately or first saying, hey, we're bringing this to the table, and getting that in very specific terms, what you believe and what you can evidence the club is bringing by way of resources, families, long-term involvement with the resort, that ambassadorship, that connection to the community. The more specific you can be as a club, the more you can do your own little economic impact studies, the more you can present the GPA of your high school athletes versus the average GPA in the local schools or in the state. I mean, anything that you can do to bring very tangible value to the table before you ever ask for anything it will really change the dynamic of the relationship. Um, so let's look at some resort missions and visions. And I would say that in the world of fundraising, this is a common practice where if I'm trying to get a grant from a grantor or a donor, I want to go and I want to look at what they value. I want to look at what they fund ultimately, what they support. And so same would hold true in this process, because really that is what we were asking them for. We're asking for them to support. We're asking them to grant either funding or in kind or hill space. And so it's that same idea. So this is, I just noticed I have Vail on here, which I meant to take off of there, but I was just grabbing examples of actual mission and vision statements of the resort. So this again is something that if I were writing a grant proposal, I would go to the foundation's website, I'd look at their mission, their vision, their values, and I would incorporate that language into every discussion that I have with them. And so here is, in fact, Vail's mission statement, and they're using that experience of a lifetime tag. They're talking about their employees being the most important thing, their team, their infrastructure, their systems and training. Those are all things that you as a club can incorporate into your language and into your discussion when you're meeting with the resort and changing the nature of, and here again, you can speak very clearly about, hey, our our mission and vision is very similar. We would just maybe replace employees with athletes and families. But other than that, we have a lot of common ground here to work on. Here's another ski area mission statement. Our mission is to provide our guests with an enjoyable recreational experience so that they will choose to return again and again. And this particular ski area lists 5 values: safety, teamwork, efficiency, enthusiasm, professionalism. As many of you know, these are things that organizations, whether for-profit or non-profit, spend a lot of time wordsmithing this sentence, these values. They incorporated this into their training. These are 5 values that do in fact get discussed at the management level, at the ownership level, at the employee level. So again, here these are key words to use in your discussions with the resort. And it's not overboard to sit down at that table and say, hey, we understand that your values are safety, teamwork, efficiency, enthusiasm, and professionalism. How can we as a club contribute to that? How we ultimately, those are 5 goals very close to what we are trying to do as a club. How can we do that together? That will change the nature of the relationship. Here's another example: enriching the mountain experience for generations. We recognize that we are stewards that provide for the sustainability of the generations of people that work here and the guests that ski and ride here. Core values are respect, integrity, performance, profitability, and nurturing. Here again, lots of common ground, but also the big difference here is that as we move on to the next slide, that there's a lot of common ground, but we cannot make the assumption that the mountain really ultimately cares too much about some of the things that are our core mission and vision, which is high level athletics and competition. That isn't necessarily in their mission and vision. And just simply recognizing that and agreeing that that is the case and that is the reality is another area that we have seen the clubs really make strides with their mountains in not cramming that down the mountain's throat and insisting that they do care or that they have to provide higher quality training venues because that's our core mission. That's not as strong an argument as, hey, here are our common grounds and we have a need to improve our venues. We have a need to do X, Y, and Z. But how can that help you serve your need, which is a more general, recreational, client experience, a guest experience, employee experience? We have to make sure we translate it to that because otherwise we're really kind of barking up the wrong tree. Now, that said, if these relationships get better through some of these strategies, then we see, and there are great examples of this around the country, we do see resorts that become extremely pro-competition, extremely pro-club, but we need to get them there. And frankly, there are fewer and fewer resorts there as the markets and the economies have weakened over the last several years. Ski areas are less interested in that, the more they're looking at their own challenges of just simply providing a good product and a profitable business. So this slide here is the many different things that as I review club mission statements nationwide, these are the things that pop up over and over again. And so these things at the top, growing participation in the sport, developing skiers and riders for life, those are absolutely core to both the resort and the club. So really focus on that and really focus on what initiatives the club is doing just with that. They don't care so much about aligning with our training systems or some of our programs or SkillsQuest. So while that is good value added to the club, it may not be value added to the relationship with the resort. Now these things in the blue, those are a little bit of the softer sell of things that as a resort community, as a ski community and snowboard community, these are things that definitely can be spoken to in terms of, hey, these are parts of our core mission and vision, and we believe that they do contribute to the product and to the experience and to the community at this resort ski area or touring center. But that's going to be secondary to those first two. And then the things in the red, those are again the things that they may or may not really care about that at all. And so be careful with how you strategize selling that, because you may go in and say, you know, we want to provide the best opportunity for our athletes, and we're going to get them into such and such level of competitions, and we want to host these high level events, and on and on and on. And they may have tuned out immediately because that isn't their mission and vision. So you have to speak their language when you're having these discussions. So a little note on how to make sure that this presentation and this effort doesn't come across as sort of me telling the clubs what to do in what I know are often extremely challenging situations, and ultimately we need as a company, as a national governing body, as a sport education department, and through club development, we are much more cognizant of how we need to support this effort, and these are some things that we are doing along those lines. Number one, we have really reinvigorated our relationship with NSAA, the National Ski Areas Association, as well as its regional chapters. And to be frank here, I think several years back and for maybe some time, maybe we as an NGB sort of sent that message, and which wasn't the message that we should be sending, which was sort of the resorts were there to serve our interests. The resorts were there to, again, back to what I said earlier, that we had this assumption that they thought all this competitive skiing and snowboarding was cool or fun or sexy or would help them sell their product. I don't know that they were sold on that, and I think that as an NGB, we have dramatically changed that relationship. We've been much more present at their national and regional conferences, giving presentations about what we're doing with our clubs, the different support that we're offering to the clubs, and what our clubs need, and listening to them as to what some of their pinch points are, so that we can better direct our programs for clubs. So that's something that we're doing. I believe we had, I think 9 people at the NSAA conference this last spring, and that really turned heads. Along with that, we have this new initiative with NASTAR. That is really speaking very positively, we feel, and very loudly with the with the resort communities as well as the club communities, that we want to connect with, again, those first couple things that are really common to us as an NGB, you as clubs, and to the industry, which is, hey, we need to use these sports to bring people in, and at any level, at the entry level, at the I'm here for a vacation and I'm going to run some gates level, and help make that a good experience, help bring them back over and over again, maybe join the club, maybe go to the ski school, what have you. But that's another area where NASTAR is representing, really connecting the dots between what resorts are trying to do by bringing in never evers and bringing new clients, and what we could help do in that area through our running of NASTAR now. Individual support and advocacy. I see a number of people on the webinar here today that I've worked directly with, not only them as club leaders, but I've reached directly across to the mountain management or mountain owners, And we're having this type of discussion that we're supporting better as an NGB and through club development and sport education, and we're able to help mediate that conversation and bring some support to you as individual clubs. We're gathering more and more data and case studies of what works well. And so again, whether we're talking to you as a club or the resort, we can give you some more tools. We're getting more insight from our resort partners. And we are, the resort community, especially NSAA, is very keen on this club development and certification process, because it's a way for them to have verification that the clubs that are operating at their areas have gone through a review of best practices. And finally, we have in place several new agreements with PSIA and Aussie to better coordinate the professional ski instructor and coach world, and professionalize instead of this sort of gap and chasm, if you will, between instructors and coaches. We have really found, especially at the club level, that the areas where there's a good amount of professional sharing, professional development, planning, leadership that crosses the aisles between instructors and coaches are not only A, running better and more successful programs athletically, but B, it's a symbol of the resort and the mountain, and the club working more closely together, even at the staffing and professional development level. So, with all that said, the golden questions that the club should be asking of the resort when those meetings are taking place. And again, I understand that many of your relations with the resorts may be quite strained at the moment. You might be in that situation where you're butting heads with the mountain. You may be in a situation where you've had that 10, 20, 30 year standoff, and it sort of degraded the relationship. So if that's the case, or if you're just approaching this and saying, hey, let's step it up in this area, these questions are the ways to do that. And we've seen this work across the country. Just coming right out and saying, how can we help you achieve your mission? Can we collaborate on marketing? Can we help sell a more unified vision for you and on your behalf? What problems or challenges are you facing that we can help solve? Are there ways that our board, staff, leadership can help the professional development of your staff, and vice versa? Going back to their mission statements and their visions, these are questions directly related to you understanding what they need from you before you make the request or have sort of hat in hand for passes, hill space, all of the above. So I'm just going to go through some successful strategies that we've identified and that have been very consistent in areas that are really striving and thriving in their relationship with the resort. Number one, and kind of big picture, is problem solving. Coming to the table and saying, again, back to those golden questions, how can we help? What challenges are you facing? The areas where this has really worked is where clubs don't think about, oh, we need to jump into a big strategic plan, or we need to jump into a big project. This starts with small victories. It starts with very simple things. And then while you have those small victories, you create a vision for large victories. So as you come up with solutions to their little problems, it starts to lay the groundwork for, oh boy, if we work together more and more and more over the next several years, the club can really help us solve some major problems, as opposed to kind of being too pie in the sky on the front end and having things not really pan out the way that you had presented, and then you're kind of right back at square one. And ultimately, in the text box over here, ultimately USSA clubs have a lot of tools at their disposal that the mountain doesn't have. Many of the clubs are nonprofits, so they have access to all different types of funding. You're connected to the community and the schools and the parents and the kids in a different way than the resort is. You have expertise on your boards and in your community that you can leverage. So these are lots of tools that the ski area may not have at their disposal. Co-branding and co-marketing. Certainly any of the clubs that have established this as a very established ongoing program to always recognize the host resort as one of their major supporters, irregardless of kind of what the behind the scenes agreements are, and really promoting them as one of your supporters, branding with them, marketing with them, and especially if they're your namesake of the club, but even if they're not, to really talk through how to do this in specific terms and how the club can even help specific branding efforts that the resort is trying to tackle. The club may be able to provide resources and access to different avenues that the mountain or the resort does not have without the club. And so I would look for areas to co-brand and co-market as aggressively as possible. With that, kind of along the same lines, just asking how you can open doors in the community. With so many of our clubs being nonprofit, you have a much more open door with schools, donors, grantors, different community foundations and organizations, and local businesses and corporations. You as a club can open these doors in ways that the resort has a very different relationship. Resorts can really have a business-only relationship with these different entities, as opposed to the club can develop a more community-oriented, a more strategically oriented relationship, and the club can do that in part on behalf of the resort. Take a simple example with the schools. Clubs, because they're an educational nonprofit in most cases, can and are typically invited to participate in that back to school night and present to kids about getting involved with the snow sports. In most cases that I've seen, as long as the nonprofit is the one that's sort of the invitee, they can bring the director of ski school along. They can bring the mountain manager along, and that's an open door through the club into the school that the resort gets that door shut on them because it's a for-profit entity, just like the school doesn't allow other for-profit entities to just come in and direct market to its students. But through the club, you can do that. And same with some of these other entities. The club can create very valuable connections that serve the resort and its strategies in ways that it can't do alone. Creating a unified vision and a master plan. So aside from those small victories, start building that in the midst of this discussion. Hey, what are your goals and what are your hopes and dreams for the ski area in the next 3 to 5 years? Here are some of ours, and really helping to create and identify a unified vision that, again, many resorts struggle with in the community, that the community looks at them as, well, they're a business. They're creating a master plan to make more money and all this. Well, it's like, yeah, they are. But with the club being a partner in that vision and selling the vision with a more educational focus, with a more athletic focus, with a more community-oriented focus, you can really turn the tide as a club in the local community with regards to the resort, and that will, from our research, that will come back to the club and to this relationship in very positive ways. Strategic communications with the resort. Um, sometimes I refer to this chart as peer-to-peer communications. And if you look at club, resort, and the level of communication, that level of communication often is starts and stops with on-hill logistics. And that is a conversation that happens between maybe the head coach or the program director and then the personnel at the resort that's responsible for very specific on-hill management. The problem is that if the discussion only happens there, there's very little opportunity for all these strategies that I've just mentioned. So it's really important to elevate the level of conversation, but talk about the appropriate things at the appropriate levels. So the board reaching directly out to the highest level of ownership or management and really having this discussion about how can we be a better partner, how can we create a better strategic alliance, and then moving that down kind of the food chain and the hierarchy so that the executive director and mountain manager are really working out policies, overriding policies that the two organizations are going to agree to, such that then when it gets down to the head coach, comp services manager, the on-hill leadership, then those on-hill logistics are a part of a much broader relationship, as opposed to just being logistics, so that when logistical issues come up, if they go above the level of that conversation, they're going to a place where they haven't even been involved with the conversation. No policies have been laid, no strategic sort of bigger picture agreements have been made, and so it bubbles up as just a problem, as just oh, there's issues with hill space, or oh, there's this or that. That's very different if we can create that flow of communication a little bit more top down, as well as bottom up. That will change the nature of the relationship. Teaming up on professional development and staff training. This is one, again, that we have found really changes the dynamic of the relationship. If the club can reach out to the resort, to the ski school, to the ski patrol, and say, hey, we train our staff, and we train our staff in these following areas. And right off the bat, that's going to be a boon to the club, that you're coming to the table, giving them a little more information of how you operate, what you value, how you train your staff, how you're making strides to be more professional and improve your product. And then say, hey, would you be willing to, look at your own staff training of, again, either the resort, the ski school, the ski patrol, and maybe there's some crossover. I guarantee there's some crossover where maybe certain club staff and employees can, or leaders can take part in other professional development within the resort structure, and vice versa. And that will go along. Not only can that be valuable in and of itself, but it goes a long way, all the way back to that idea of really understanding the mission and vision of the two. A club leader or a head coach or program director sitting through a day of staff training of the resort staff, they'd have a much clearer picture of what some of the pinch points are with the mountains project and priorities. And same with doing it on the other way. And that will build respect, it builds collegiality, it builds professionalism, and I would look for opportunities to do that this fall going into this season. And again, start small, and build on early victories. Finally, and I can't emphasize this one enough. It really maybe should have been a little higher up on the food chain of these successful strategies. But I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but the club insurance world is very, very, very gray. And the insurance world, the insurance gap between resorts and other entities operating on the resort is a very big gap. And what we have discovered is that part of the reason that it's a big gap is that neither the club nor the resort often take a close enough look at this, and so it becomes this very scary, elephant in the room sort of thing where nobody is quite sure if the club is covered for everything they're doing and if the resort is covered for everything they're doing, and whether those coverages are pointed back and forth to one another. And if you're in a position where you've gotten this very buttoned up, then you know that that may have taken some heavy lifting and some real very detailed look at this issue. But in almost every case, when I've talked to resort leadership, this is their biggest concern. They just want to know that, whatever's happening out there, that the T's have been crossed and the I's dotted. And so I would suggest that you as a club take the initiative to do a very formal review of that on your behalf and on the resort's behalf, and bring that to them so that they can see from your your evidence and your documentation and your presentation that you can show them in no uncertain terms that your insurance is provides all the adequate coverage, that they are named as a co-insured. There's obviously lots of issues and intricacies here, but ultimately this is one of their biggest concerns. We have, this isn't a hard sales pitch, but we have dramatically improved our club liability insurance program. We've made it much easier from the reporting standpoint. We've made it much more cost effective and lower cost. We've buttoned up all the gaps between resort and club liability. The coverages are adequate to what resorts are looking for these days. And there's just no gray area in the insurance product that we are offering. So I would invite you to take a look at that club liability insurance. It's also something that we've presented directly to the National Ski Areas Association, and they're very pleased with the progress that we've made there, really on their behalf as much as on the behalf of the clubs. So take a look at that if you're interested, and contact me directly, or I can put you in touch with membership and those who handle that insurance applications directly. And then finally, written agreements. Moving anything that we've talked about in the presentation today is something that often will start informally. It will start with just changing the dynamic of the conversation. It will start with new people coming to the table and saying, hey, I'm willing to take this on as a board member or as a community member on behalf of the club. And it's always going to start probably on the more informal level, especially if you don't have some more formal things in place. But I would encourage you to, no matter what the strategy that you start to employ, start to also think of how can we move this from just a handshake to something that's a little more spelled out in black and white terms, with just a letter of intent, moving it up toward a letter of understanding, moving it toward more of a memo of understanding, and excuse me, many of you do in fact have contracts, very specific legally binding contracts and operating agreements with your mountains. And again, here too, we often find that those aren't reviewed. They're just sort of signed as a matter of course year after year. And this is something where, through some of the strategies that I've presented of things that are really working out in the field, move those along and maybe have those things change the nature of that contract a little bit by increasing the formality of co-marketing strategies, increasing the formality of, hey, we're going to do some combined professional development every year. And then if that stuff makes it all the way into the contract, then you have a really strategic contract instead of a contract that often has the club over the barrel. a little bit because they haven't gone through some of the strategies mentioned in today's presentation, and the contract simply covers, hey, we'll give you this hill space and these are your liabilities, and that's that. Anything that any of these strategies you can work into a contract and up the line of these levels of agreement is going to be a benefit to your club. So that's what I have for you today, and I did, I'm sure you did, and I noticed a couple typos, and I'm going to scold myself for that right now. So I apologize there. But anybody have comments or questions? And while we're doing that, I'm also going to open this this survey. I just put together a real simple survey so that I can get a little snapshot from the focus group, if you will, that's on the line here today. So if you can answer that survey while we're wrapping up here, that's really good data for me to get a sense of where things are at with our clubs out in the field. But beyond that, anybody have some questions, challenges, or some success stories for that matter, other strategies that have worked for you out there? And if you can use the chat box for that, that would be great. All right, group out there. Anything that has been working particularly well? Looks like Mark Cole has a comment. Thanks for taking part in the survey, and looks like some comments are coming in that we'll address here in a second. Okay, yeah, Mark Cole has a comment here. Co-branding is an interesting concept. We often want to distinguish ourselves from the Aspen Skiing Company. Absolutely, I think that co-branding doesn't mean that you are presenting as one entity. Again, I think it's important there when you are co-branding to recognize that there are two different missions, there are two different visions, but that the co-branding can be created, and the messaging can be created along those lines of, this is how we contribute to one another's mission and vision. They're not the same, but we do share them. So I agree with you, Mark. I think that we don't want to send the message that, oh, we're just a pawn of the mountain, or that we are a corporate entity of the mountain, because that's not the case. We're in the case of Aspen Valley Ski Club, you're a private 501c3 nonprofit with your own mission and vision. So yes, distinguish yourself. Put out in the messaging that you understand their mission and vision through that co-branding. Jacob has a question. Can you speak to the kind of historical traction achieved by the club that will be positively received by the resort, since they may be less impressed by competitive results? So yeah, Jacob, I think historical traction is in fact the key there. what if you want to change the relationship of the club and the resort, and maybe that relationship has fallen prey to some of the things I mentioned earlier, where the club has just been saying, well, my gosh, we have all these great athletes and these great kids, and they're just kind of not buying it, and it's been that historically. The only way to change that historically is to start changing that rhetoric, start changing that case that you're making with the mountain or with the resort, and then and then once you start that, it can only become historical traction if you kind of change the nature and stick to that for the next several years, and lay it out that way as a club. Hey, we're going to change the nature of this relationship over the next 3 seasons, over the next couple seasons, over the next 5 seasons. What are we going to do this year? And then be able to point to that next year at this time and say, hey, look at that. We started to change the nature of the relationship. These are the things we focused on. We had some strides there. Now you go into year 2. And so I hope that answers your question, that if you start to change what you're tracking, and if you start to change the case, and if you are more consistent with that, that is what has changed the relationship for the clubs that have sort of that best case scenario. And of course, what hopefully happens too is then the athletic results come as well as a part of that transition. And so now you can tell both sides of the story. And then, now you're in the position where, hey, the relationships gets better in general from a strategic standpoint of us promoting each other's mission and vision. And look at that. Our particular mission and vision is increasing in its efficacy through athletic results. And they see that. Hopefully their priorities and goals are being met. And now they, in fact, see you as a partner in the evolution of the club. So that's how I would describe getting that historical traction. So Mark Cole said, there's a comment here from Aspen, having shared board members is definitely a strategy that we would see as beneficial. But as Mark's second comment comes in, he says we wouldn't have the person be a board president. And I would take it even a step further. I would say that when I see a board have a post for a mountain employee, a mountain management employee, that's almost in all cases a very positive thing. It's important, though, that board post is very clearly described as whatever it is that you've designed it to be. So things like, are they a voting member or not a voting member? What is the highest post they can hold? Are they there? It's very important to specify to the board and define that post as, this person is here as a representative of the ski company, not as a member of the community. And so that which is fine. If that's what they're there to do, then it's open that, hey, we may not, again, with those two different mission and visions, they're in the know, they're in discussion with your leadership team, but there might be times where certain things that the club is doing don't mesh with what the mountain is doing. It's good to have that open discussion, but then it's also important to have structures in place so that that person isn't in a position where they feel like that's unclear. Like, hey, as a member of this community, I would vote this way. As as somebody who answers to the ski company, I would answer this way. Really define that conflict going in, define that post liaison, and exactly what it is, and then it can be extremely positive to have that crossover. Any other questions or comments? That's definitely a big one. Shared board responsibilities or posts. All right, well, that's noon on the dot. I appreciate everybody attending today, and if you have I'm just going to throw my email in here, and if you have any other thoughts or specific resources that you would like to see developed or keep the conversation going, go ahead and hit me directly with an email. I do have a packet that I'll send out to anybody that participated today that walks through this from crafting a strategic agreement type of angle. So thank you all for attending. It's almost Labor Day, which means things will start heating up for all of us in the ski industry. And so I look forward to a great fall leading into a very successful season. Hope to see you all out on the slopes. Take care.